Yeah, absolutely. First of all, I love to see that we have 170 people
Yeah,
joining.
it's brilliant. Thank you.
Fantastic. So first of all, thanks for everyone making time. And I also saw a lot of people joining from the UK. So very, very much appreciated. And thanks to all the managers who made it all right for everybody on their teams to join as well. All right, so we've touched on this a couple of times. We said it's the oldest form, one of the oldest forms of hate. It dates back a very, very long time, thousands of years. And while it's peaked a lot over the past few years, and I think that's one of the impetuses for having this talk, I think we need to start from the beginning. So Aryeh, if you wouldn't mind, maybe we start with what that history is and what the background is on anti-Semitism.
Sure. And this is bringing me right back to my graduate school days. So yeah, look, I mean, Judaism, and I think this gets to something that Simon was mentioning about the fact that Judaism is not only a religion, but it is also a culture. It is a peoplehood. It can incorporate ethnicities. Judaism began as a tribal religion 3,000 years ago. And, you know, it was a Middle Eastern tribal religion. It was, as far as we know, it was the first genuine monotheism that existed in the world. And in a tribal context where you had warring people over little pieces of land and, you know, religion and things like that, it is out of that matrix that opposition to Judaism as a religion began to emerge. So Jews lasted longer than a lot of those ancient tribes. We don't have, the Hittites and the Assyrians and the various other tribes that the, proto-Jews were dealing with at the time. And so I guess over the centuries, the awareness that, oh, there is this group of people, there is this tribal group of people who have passed down their own traditions generation after generation, have at times been in conflict with other folks in the region, at times have had treaties and allyships with people in the region. You can read a lot about this in the Bible. So that sort of became a freestanding awareness that lots of people had. Now, the type of tribal conflict that may have existed 3,000 years ago has very little resemblance to the type of anti-Semitism that eventually emerged. And certainly by the time you had other monotheistic faiths emerging, you now had a greater sense of similarity between religions, but you also had a great deal more of conflict between the religions, because whereas in the past, you may have had a polytheistic religion, which, the Jewish God could be one of many other gods. And so there was no inherent conflict over there. Once you had major monotheistic religions competing with each other for hundreds and thousands of years, there was a sense that, well, either one is right or the other is right. And so you had this sort of built-in conflict. Now today, thankfully, in much of the world, we have moved past, that sort of zero-sum game approach to religion and monotheism. And we recognize that there are different people have different approaches, and different beliefs, and we celebrate that. That's great. But 2,000 years ago, that level of tolerance and the embracing of difference is not quite the level that we have in Oliver, today. There were also certain nationalistic elements. Jews had lived as a freestanding political entity in ancient Palestine or ancient Israel. They had their own kingdoms that fought against other bigger powers that were trying to dominate them and take over. And so Jews in some cases were seen as troublemakers who weren't integrating into the larger Greek Empire or Roman Empire because they insisted on having their independence. And so over time, especially as Christianity became the dominant religion, you started having what becomes more familiar to us as classic anti-Semitism. You had in this conflict between the church and synagogue, you started having a theology of anti-Semitism on the part, certainly in Christian Europe, where there was a priesthood which took their theological arguments with Jews and turned it into attacks on Jews. Jews were in league with the devil. Jews were the agents of evil in the world, and Jews were perfect scapegoats. They were relatively few in number, but they lived in many different communities. And when something bad would happen in a community, it was easy to blame the perennial outsider, who, from a theological perspective, may have already been under suspicion of not being, in with the larger community. When a child would go missing, sometimes people would say, oh, the Jews did it. And eventually you had the development of this theology that Jewish people, or conspiracy theories, that Jewish people, because they were in league with the devil, according to medieval Christian belief, Jews would purposely select a Christian child every year to kidnap and murder and use their blood in rituals. This became known as the blood libel. You had the belief that the Christian host, the Eucharist that was offered in churches, there was this belief that Jews, because of their allegedly implacable hatred of Christians, would steal the host, these wafers, and subject them to demeaning and degrading practices as a way of carrying out their alleged hatred for Christianity and inflicting that on the flesh of Christ, so to speak. And then eventually you started having, in such an environment where these allegations were prominent, it is not surprising that people began acting on those beliefs. And so you started having Jews being attacked and driven out of the towns and cities in which they lived. Synagogues were burned. Jews were burnt at the stake. It was a terrible fear whenever a child would go missing for Jewish communities in medieval Europe, because what would happen? Depending on the demagoguery of whichever priest or leader in the town at the time, Jews could suddenly be driven out with no warning, and their synagogue burnt and their holy books destroyed. Eventually, as time went by, we encountered the idea that Jews, other conspiracy theories emerged and allegations emerged and were sort of grafted on to this core of anti-Jewish hatred. The idea during the Black Death needed a scapegoat. Oh, the Jews were poisoning the wells in Europe, and that's why there was a pandemic that affected the entire continent. And we've seen echoes of that today, in the way that many people, extremists and hardcore anti-Semites, were blaming Jews for COVID. In the early modern period, you started having a racialization. It was no longer about the theology of Judaism, and now became about Jews as a race. You had the rise of race science and the belief that even if a Jew would convert to Christianity, they could not escape the Jewish blood that was running in their veins, and that it could not be transformed through conversion. And we know what that led up to. You had the emergence of the Protocols of the Elders of Zion that recast the ancient belief in Jewish conspiracies in a modern form. You had the elders, who were the Jews who were plotting to take over the world. And ultimately, you had the Holocaust, where the only solution to the Jewish problem was the physical annihilation of Jewish people. And close to 6 million Jewish people were killed in the greatest mass murders in history. That is, in a nutshell, the sad history of anti-Semitism. And that is not to say that all of Jewish history is this tale of woe. You have many beautiful developments in Jewish culture and literature and art and religious texts. And certainly there is plenty to celebrate. But that is the historical background that Jews carry on their backs. There is this awareness. I learned about these things as a child when I went to a Jewish school. The awareness of this history, yeah.
And how is this sort of manifesting itself in, the world today, the digital world today, and the, with the way the press has been transformed in the last few decades, and, the communication, and just what's happening in the world, and what's the role of your organization in helping us navigate this?
Absolutely. So, I mean, what we've really seen, look, I grew up hearing stories from my grandfather about how when he would be walking to school, he would have to watch out for the gangs of boys or bullies, non-Jews on the way, who he would have to fight with in order to get to school, because that was the form of anti-Semitism that they were still in the United States, within living memory, encountering that. And the idea that Jews were not allowed into clubs, and there were exclusionary covenants to not let Jews into certain housing areas or professions or schools. And today, those ideas, thank God, we've had changes in, Christian belief and religious evolution, as I said. But unfortunately, a lot of those old conspiracy theories that I mentioned have found new life online. We have seen this bubbling cauldron, this festering swamp of people who, just as I am aware of the history of anti-Semitism, they too are aware of the history of anti-Semitism, and they reiterate it, and they repackage it, and they use social media to disseminate it, or try to disseminate it in a way that it never had certainly in the memory of the United States, which, thank God, which is my expertise, where we have had in the post-World War II period, we had a remarkably hospitable environment for Jewish people. Suddenly you have this resurgence of this festering swamp of conspiracy theories, blaming Jews for whatever is happening in the world. These things begin usually in the far corners of the internet, like places like 4chan or Gab or BitChute or places like that. But the hardcore anti-Semites are purposely trying to take those ideas and get them into mainstream platforms, to turn them into memes, to weaponize them, and to foment that hatred, not only in those hidden spaces, but also in mainstream spaces as well. What does ADL do? What are we here for? So ADL began over 100 years ago in 1913 as a response to the lynching of a Jewish man who was falsely accused of a heinous crime. And our founders determined at the time, if you look in our charter, I'm so proud to work for ADL because our charter says that our mission is not only to protect Jewish people, but to obtain, to safeguard justice and freedom for all. At the time, 100 years ago, perhaps we were the first we had this intersectional awareness that to safeguard Jewish people, we need to make sure that everyone in society is protected, that we live in a civil society where the rights of everyone are respected. And so that is the dual mission that continues to animate ADL today. My team in the Center on Extremism, we're not the Center on Anti-Semitism. We are the Center on Extremism, because we are concerned about the way that hatred of all kinds, extremism of all kinds, affects people of all races and creeds and nationalities and sexual or gender identity. These are things that we are very concerned about. And so our work in the Center on Extremism is to stand atop the wall and watch how these extremists and these anti-Semites and these haters of various kinds are generating their ideas, are planning their attacks, are trying to promote their ideologies. And we do this with intense levels of detail. We have 40 people in our Center on Extremism. Over half of them are subject matter experts on various facets of extremism and hate. And their job is to go in every single day with inventories of known extremists and known anti-Semites and known bigots and haters, and with the mission of expanding those inventories, and every day to look in on the social media of those people, literally going down a list, logging in, taking screenshots, taking notes, and doing constant threat assessments. Is this white supremacist who we've been following for a while beginning to show signs that they are going beyond simply spouting National Socialist doctrine and beginning to pose with weapons, or talking about walking around town and scoping out the mosque or the synagogue or the church. And when we see something like that, we make these threat assessments. We write up dossiers on these people. We share them with law enforcement. We make sure that if there is a way of taking them off the street because they pose a danger, we let law enforcement know so that they can then carry out that mission of keeping people safe.